Well, hi, everybody. Why don't you take a minute and just say hello to somebody who is in your row? Row. Someone close by. Just say hi. So this morning we start a brand new series. This is actually our last series in our bigger parable series. And because in December we start a Christmas series, and then in January we start something new. So this is our last set. Before we get rolling and introduce the series and the message, just a couple of things really quick. You and I have been friends now for maybe 2.5 months. And you're beginning to notice that how things are maybe changing here a little bit as messages are put together and delivered. Not only just with me, but also with the teaching team here at Lakeview. And part of what we're getting at is this, that we want to create talks that start talks. So the things we pull apart, the things we bring together, the things that we connect here, the hope and intention is that it rattles around in your brain and your soul in the next 6 days after you've heard it. So sometimes you'll walk out of here feeling encouraged, and sometimes you might walk out of here feeling reflective. Other times you may walk out of here, scratch your head, wondering, what the heck did I just listen to? Those are all good things, because they spur us forward to really allow Jesus' words and the ideas to sink deep into our lives. And attached to that also is the fact that we're using lots of quotes these days, lots of illustrations and articles and videos to kind of connect the dots. And the reason we do this is as follows. That as the church, we've been having a conversation about Jesus for the last 2,000 years. And there have been saints who have gone before us who have been plugging through the exact same things that we are sensing and feeling and trying to figure out. And the beauty of the age that we find ourselves in is that we can easily and quickly pull those ideas, thoughts, and quotes and images from the span of history and bring them into the conversation that we are having now to help inform us about where Christians have been and where Christians are headed. And then when we connect it to articles and videos like we have today, we want to make the connections between what the church has been talking about, what Jesus is talking about, and how that fits in to our lives. So that's how we're pulling all those pieces together, and I hope it's floating your boat. Because if it's not, it's kind of too late between us. And we're stuck. You're stuck with me. Hey, everyone. Here I am. Not going anywhere. So with that in mind, again, this morning we start a brand new series. It's called Trailers. These are the parables where Jesus talks about discipleship, about what it means for us to follow him and what it means for us to leave a trail behind us so that others can join in on this journey. And over the next 4 weeks, we're going to layer this idea of discipleship and really begin to unpack it a little. So this morning, here we go, the one with the two builders. It's a shorty. It's in both Matthew and Luke. And the parable goes like this. He says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash." Luke tells the same story this way. This is Jesus speaking. "As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came and the torrent struck the house, but it could not be shaken because it was all well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete." Now, Matthew and Luke are giving two different sides to the same story here. Matthew is narrowing in on the location and the weather conditions. Luke is more concerned about the process and the foundation upon which the house is built. And through both of these retellings, Jesus is asking a heart question here. The question to them and the question to us is this: where is it that you have chosen to live? I remember when I was 20 years old, I'd been moved out of my house for a couple of years already, living with my parents, and now I'd spent 2 years in a dorm, and now in my third year, totally broken free, and I decide to rent a house with 4 other buddies, maybe 2 blocks from the campus of the school that I was going to. I'm not sure if any of you have ever seen houses that are sort of dedicated student housing, or perhaps you've lived in a house like this, but there's a sort of funk that comes with a house that has been filled with students. And for the 12 months that I lived in this house, I don't think we ever cleaned anything once. And basically, we were just following in the tradition of the guys who had rented the house the year before and those who had rented before them. You know, you walk in and the carpet is this dark green, but you knew it started out as like a beige carpet. And, you know, like around the light switches is kind of this, you know, textured brown, you know, area. And I remember Sarah and I were dating at the time, and she came in and she saw the bathroom. And for the longest time, I thought that we had a gray bathtub. But it wasn't a gray bathtub. It was a white bathtub that was actually gray from dirt. She said, "You guys are disgusting." And she did everything as she could on that Saturday afternoon with all the solvents and the brushes and the cleaners to clean up that bathtub. 2 hours later, she emerges from the bathroom and she says, "I couldn't do anything. It's still there. It's not getting clean." And she looked at me straight in the eye and she said, "How do you shower in that disgusting bathtub?" I said, "Oh, it's easy. I wear flip-flops in the shower." Which is hilarious to you, but grosses me out today because I thought if I just wear flip-flops, then I'll just keep the germs off. Often you and I, we choose to live in the craziest places, in the craziest habitats. We choose to live with and under conditions that are less than ideal. And I'm not talking so much about housing here. I'm talking more about life space. Here are some stats. This is out of the U.S. In the U.S., by the time an average American child leaves elementary school, they have seen 200,000 violent acts and 40,000 murders on television. Think about that. By the time a kid is 12, 13 years old, he's already been exposed to 250,000 violent acts, images that lodge themselves into our brains. So when it comes to us and what Jesus is talking about, the question is, hey, why is it that sometimes we choose to set up shop where we allow our youngest to be exposed to an overwhelming disregard for life? Well, what about this stat out of the UK? It says here, a dad is the 10th most popular Christmas list request for children in Britain. So they did a survey. This is from an article from 2012. And the averages came out, and number 10 is a dad. I just want to be with dad for Christmas. What does this say about how we handle our families? What does this say about how we handle our responsibilities? What does this say in connection to what Jesus is saying, where we choose to set up shop in a place where the things that should be the most important to us end up being the least important? One last one. This one's fresh. American consumers are expected to collectively spend $370 million on pet costumes this Halloween. That's $70 million more than last year and a whopping 40% increase compared to 2010. Because in 2012, $51 billion was spent on pets. So when Jesus begins to make a distinction between where we live, he's calling to our attention what we give priority to, what we expose ourselves to, and perhaps what we choose to ignore. He says to us in not so many words, are we well adjusted to injustice? Are we well adapted to indifference? Have we intentionally or unintentionally allowed our lives to be formed by the settings that we find ourselves in? In this parable, Jesus uses the terms, "hear my words," and put them into practice. Put another way, it's like Jesus saying, I'm calling you from one place and bringing you towards something else. Some of us have grown up in a place where we've heard the words of Jesus more as an angry, fist-waving kind of thing, where he says, you'd better follow me or else. What Jesus is actually saying in this parable and the whole of the scriptures is, move away from that way of thinking. Instead, come live with me and be fully alive. Because this is a movement away from a rigid regiment of do's and don'ts and towards something away from this dirty world where we think, you know what, if I just wear flip-flops in the dirty shower, everything is going to be okay. We will fool ourselves into thinking that we're actually clean. Moving away from that and moving towards a life that is captivated by good. A life that is captivated by wholeness and healing. A life that is captivated by redemption. In Hebrew, the words hear and obey are often connected. They're translated the same way. And what Jesus is saying here, he says, I am moving you away from a life that is disconnected towards a life that is captivated by obedience. And not obedience in the way that, I've got to do this, but an obedience that says, we get to do this. An obedience that is an inclusion in what God is doing. Theologian Walter Brueggemann adds this piece. He says, the Bible is essentially an open, imaginative narrative of God's staggering care for the world. A narrative that feeds and nurtures us in an obedience that builds community, precisely through respect for the liberty of individual Christians. What Jesus is saying, what Brueggemann is saying, what we are experiencing is all connected in this sense that we are called towards this captivated obedience. And this isn't an obedience that limits us and limits our lives, but this is actually an obedience that opens that up, brings us life, gives us freedom to do the things that we are called to do, and perhaps the freedom to be the people that we have been designed to be. And not only just for us, no, but for God's glory and for the benefit of the world. Okay, science. I'm picking up what you're dropping here. You and I, as human beings, were not wired for violence, for aggression, for self-interest. Instead, what we're truly wired for is sociability, for attachment, for affection, for companionship. There's something about us. We are connected in a way where we are able to share joy and able to share pain. We're soft-wired to belong to one another. So in a way, the solid ground that Jesus is talking about in this parable speaks to a returning for us, a returning to our roots, returning and being fully human. Or as he puts it elsewhere, you have been designed, you were meant to love God and to love one another and to love your enemies as you love yourself. Catholic priest and writer Richard Rohr, you should read everything he writes. He adds this piece. He says, if there is nothing in your life to cry about, if there's nothing in your life to yell about, then you must be out of touch. We must all feel and know the immense pain of humanity. The free space that God leads us into is to be able to feel the full spectrum, from great exaltation and joy to the pain of mourning and dying and suffering. Then we are no longer isolated, but a true member of the universal body of Christ. This is part of what it means for us to return to God's greater intention for humanity. And as Jesus put it in the parable, to build in the right setting, to put the right processes in place, to gauge the soil now becomes code for, are you being who you have been designed to be? Are you shaping the environment that you are in? Or are you and I being shaped by the environment we find ourselves in? Can we as disciples, followers, trailers, can we live in such a way that we can be in the world as Jesus was and is in the world? Because you see, on both accounts here, no matter who tells it, Matthew or Luke, this parable is sort of piggyback. It's the caboose, the back end on the Sermon on the Mount. And through those chapters, Jesus goes to great lengths to explain the ins and outs of mercy, love, and compassion. And by way of a final illustration, he makes clear through this parable what he expects of us as disciples. And that's to continue in his way and continue in his work. Because it's in this continuation that we are actually able to see and hear and know who God is. Because it is not just that the hearing of Jesus' words is supposed to be followed up by appropriate action. Rather, only in action does proper hearing take place. And this connects back to our last series, especially last week's message, when the master said to his servants, listen, I want you to do business with mercy, grace, love, forgiveness, healing, hope, and peace. This is the measure of a disciple. In this shaky, in-between time, what are you doing with what I have given you? So for us as trailers of Jesus, leaving some breadcrumbs, seeds, and tracks for others to follow, you and I are called to have skin in the game. To be a disciple, to be a Christian, isn't to be an armchair quarterback and then just pontificate, point our fingers, laugh, cry, and make comments. Instead, we're called to be a part of the action. And as the parable instructs, it says, hey, be aware of your setting, of the soil, of the layout, of the temperature, of the rains that are coming. Be aware of those things. And what that translates for us is this. When people look at us and are curious about Jesus, nobody is asking the question, hey, do I believe in your tenets of faith? What they're asking is do I want to be like you? Do I want to be part of your tribe? Do I want to be doing the things that I see you doing? And as our friends watch us in both good and bad weather, do they get a glimpse of what it means to be fully human? Or do they get a glimpse of something else? Is it a picture of a house that's built on solid ground? Or are they getting a picture of a house that's built on sand? Back to the setting that Jesus spoke in, we got to remember that when he showed up on the scene, the temple was in perfect working order. People were doing things as they always had been doing them, and the religious machine was going at all cylinders, and nobody was asking, man, there's got to be a better way that we can do this. But then Jesus shows up as the great disruptor and says, hey, guess what? This God business, we are moving it out of the temple and into a people. And then Jesus himself becomes the substitute for the temple. He is now the connection between God and earth. And then he says, listen, I'm going to reassign the priestly duty to everyone who makes themselves available. So for us in present day Christianity, to be a disciple is to be like Jesus and to be able to speak into the culture and the times and the weather that we find ourselves in. Even when skies are sunny and things appear normal and good, but really aren't. We are called to speak into a situation that says, hey, your kids are going to see 250,000 violent acts by the time they're 13 years old. As disciples of Jesus, when we see stats that say kids just want their parents for Christmas, a very basic need, we are called to step in and be a part of that. Wrestle that through to the ground and be part of God's redemptive work there. Or when, as a culture, we collectively spend billions of dollars on things that really aren't that important, Jesus' words here to us call into question how we spend ourselves, how we steward our resources in times that appear normal, but really aren't that normal. And what about when it rains? What about when the dark storm clouds roll in? Notice in the parable that the storm hits both the wise builder's house and the foolish builder's house. They both take a beating. And I think what this speaks to is the reality that the Christian life is not immune to hardship. When in fact, what the storm actually does is reveal who's done their homework and who's built their house on the right plot of land. Sometimes we've taken this idea of Christianity and said, man, as soon as I say yes to Jesus, my life's going to be hunky-dory and it's going to be perfect all the way out to the end. That's just not true. Some of us look back to the early church in the book of Acts and we say, oh, look at those guys. Acts chapter 2, they're sorting out their belongings, they're giving away freely, they are hospitable, they're giving money away, everyone is totally taken care of. And these are all good, beautiful things. Yes, we aspire to them. But why is that happening? Oh, it's because obvious. Because here's a group of people who have said, we've decided to build our lives on something other than what other people see as normal. We're into this Jesus thing now. So what this does, first of all, is it cuts them off from their own countrymen. Because now they are moving away from their brothers and sisters and the religion that they had held on to for generations. And we already know that the Romans have had it up to here with the Hebrews. But now there's this new sect of Jews that says, we follow a Savior where we eat his body and we drink his blood. Oh, are they cannibals? So now they're cutting themselves off from their own people. They're making trouble for the government. So what's happening is they're being cut off from social services, from trade, from business, from social settings. So they are forced into a place to take care of themselves. Why? Because they're doing the right thing. Wait, they did the right thing and the storm still came? Yeah. Or the Apostle Paul. Look at the example of his life. Sometimes we say to ourselves, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. Yeah, he does. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be bumps and bruises along the way. Now you look at Paul. Geez Louise, the guy writes half the New Testament. Can you beat that? I don't think so. But he suffers shipwrecks and beatings and whippings and stonings and being dragged out by wild horses and left for dead on the edge of town. This is a guy who's doing everything Jesus is asking him to do. And you notice at the end of some of his epistles, he starts writing with his own handwriting. And he says something along the lines of, you'll notice my letters are getting bigger now. I'm writing in my own handwriting. Why does he make mention of that? Well, I'm wondering, if you've been shipwrecked and beat down and stoned and dragged by wild horses, what are the chances that your eyesight is going to be damaged through all that? What are the chances that your arms and hands are probably broken, busted up, maybe healed improperly, and now are so gnarled that you can barely hold a quill? This is the guy who wrote half the New Testament? But in spite of the storms, Jesus says in this parable to us, in spite of those things, for those of us who have chosen to live, to hang our hats where God always intended for us to live, for those of us who have built our lives on the solid foundations of life in Jesus, the parable says, no matter what storm comes, Matthew says you'll be able to stand, and then Luke takes it the next step and says, and you will not even be shaken. And this isn't just a guarantee for the life to come, but this is also for the life that is here and now. So may we recognize that where we choose to set up shop is of critical importance. And this is going to take a lot of trust and obedience on our part to Jesus. But it's a trust and obedience that doesn't say, I have to do this. It's a yes, we get to do this. And as we follow Jesus in this way, may we remember that you and I have been soft-wired to belong to each other by design, connected to God and connected to each other. And this requires us as Christians to have skin in the game, not bystanders, but active and on the field. And no matter if the days are sunny and they appear normal, but they really shouldn't be normal, or if the dark clouds are rolling in and the storms are beating us like there is no tomorrow, may we remember as followers, disciples, trailers of Jesus, that no matter what comes our way, we will be able to stand and not be shaken because of everything Jesus did and because of who he is. I'm going to invite the ushers forward to take the communion elements and the band to come out as well. As we conclude our time here today, and ushers, go for it. You can begin serving them right now. I want us to sort of carve out these next 5 minutes to reflect on what we've heard, what we've sung, and the words of Jesus. And as we do this together as a family, I encourage you to be open to whatever the Spirit might have to say. As far as instructions go, it's pretty easy. We're going to pass out the bread, hang on to that. And then we're going to pass out the juice, hang on to that. And after everyone has been served, we'll come back, we will read, we will partake together, and then we'll close in prayer.